the papers are absolutely full of Prince Harry and turning 40 and his regret and all of this.
What's he regretting?
Well,
sort of drinking at 20.
I'm not sure that's the bit he regrets, actually. I think it's the more recent stuff.
Right.
I don't know, it's a bit boring, isn't it? I'd hoped that when they decided to pack up and leave, vacate Frogmore Cottage, we could have a break, you know, and then there was the Worldwide Privacy Tour, and they just haven't stopped. It's actually got worse. If he'd hoped for a bit of respite from all the media attention, he certainly hasn't had it, but I don't think he ever really did. I think that was... or I don't think she ever did. I think that was the plan, was that all of this was only meant to get them more attention. But now, as you say, this statement where he doesn't mention her, and there's this idea that he's excited about turning 40, but then all the reports going with it about how he regrets what's happened and with the family, and perhaps 40 is that turning point. Many people reach 40 and take stock, let's say halfway, and think, you know, what could I do differently? What did I get wrong? What can I improve on? I think with him, there is a lot of room for improvement, as in many people's lives. And I don't want to be horrible. I don't know Prince Harry personally, but as with everyone, I've watched him grow up more or less in tandem with myself. We're not that far apart in age. I do think there's a point at which, in adulthood, especially in middle age, you reach a stage where you've got to stop blaming other people. And I think that the last few years of Prince Harry's life has been focused very much on blaming other people.
Starmer beware.
Well, I'm not sure how much you can blame Keir Starmer. You mean Keir Starmer blaming the Tories?
The last Tory government. And he'll be saying that in 4 years' time. The last Tory government, I mean, we've got a 4-year track record now of
well,
chaos.
It sounds like his black hole. Prince Harry could fill some of that, if you ask me, with some of his inheritance. I can't see it happening. I mean, can you? The nation would barely welcome him, but to bring his wife and kids and everyone home after all of that drama and the expense, I don't think it's been cheap, this separation. Divorces are expensive at the best of times, but when you're sort of divorcing the royal family as a seventh or whatever he was in line to the throne, I think there's been a lot of musical houses in the royal family since he left. There's been all the controversy about security, about legal cases. I think we've had enough. I do.
So Harry may
But happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Let's leave it on that happy note. I wish him well. You know, I hope he can sort himself out. And he was a very popular member of the royal family.
He's still got the Invictus Games, which was a fantastic coup.
We'll always have the Invictus Games.
But I mean, it's seriously, it's a very, very good.
It's a positive thing.
But
again, there was a lot of criticism about the last Invictus Games and Meghan's kind of muscling in and all of that. And I think that I think the danger is, when you're a royal, if you do something like promote the cause of veterans with disabilities or who've been affected by their service, and then help them to reach levels of excellence as they have in the Invictus Games, I think it's great. But when you treat it the other way around, which is you use the heroism of veterans who've had injuries in order to burnish your own ailing career as a celebrity or royal, then you've got things the wrong way around. And that's always been Meghan and Harry's problem, in my opinion, is the royal family is a really weird beast. It's this historic, anachronistic thing we have in this country, and yet many people love it. And so the royals have to strike this fine balance where they use their position of immense privilege and power and wealth in order to promote causes that are important beyond themselves. And of course, it's a two-way street. By using those worthy causes, they kind of promote themselves as well. I think Meghan and Harry have got that balance all wrong since they've been together, and they seem to hijack good causes in order to make themselves look good, rather than adopt good causes in order to attract our attention to people who are needier than they are, which is just about everyone.
03444991000. I'm here with Jonathan Sacerdoti as we go through the morning papers. Joanna from Salisbury. Hello, Joanna. I love this shirt. Thanks very much. For those of you watching on YouTube or via your smart TV, I'm wearing a snazzy weekend number as opposed to the traditional shirt and tie that you've come to know and love from me Monday to Friday. I hope Keir Starmer, she says, doesn't let Esther Ranson down like he has everyone else. It would be a kick in the teeth for a woman who's done so much in her life for others. It's a small ask for a debate on changing the law, and what Joanna is referring to is this story in the Daily Express. PM, please keep they've promised to change this cruel law. Dame Esther, as we know, Jonathan, is terminally ill.
Yeah.
And what she wants is a change in the law to guarantee assisted suicide. And time is running out for her. Jonathan?
It's a really thorny topic, and I must say that I am broadly in favour of allowing people who are in the final part of their lives with a terminal illness that is uncurable, incurable, and largely untreatable at certain stages, to give them the dignity of being able to choose. And I think that the reality is, I believe that she has lung cancer, is it? The reality is, for many of us who've experienced close family members who've had similar conditions and died from them, that doctors do assist patients in their final days quite often to pass away. And yet, I think that because of the law, it's often done in actually quite a painful and slow and inhuman way. So, you know, when we have a sick dog who is beyond help, we take them to the vet and they put them out of their misery as painlessly and sensitively as possible. And when we have a sick relative who is in immense pain, wasted away and what have you, we're told, well, we can put them on a lot of pain relief drugs, which, if we nudge them up slowly, will kill them.
That's right.
And the priority is relieving their pain symptoms, and the side effect might be killing them. I do understand why that's the way that we currently paint this picture, but I think in reality, we all know what's happening. And I think that in somebody's final days, to keep somebody going for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in that sort of state, that vegetative state, they can't eat, they can't drink, but they're slowly fading away, and we're just nudging up their opiates so that eventually it will kill them. I don't really see the point in the charade and the pretense there.
But there's one thing about there which springs to mind, this rather sinister Liverpool care pathway, where they might just kill old people because they're 80, rather than them being 80 and terminally ill, and that's
that's the risk. And
that's the risk. It's more than a risk,
famous,
isn't it?
I don't know if you remember the famous Dr. Mark Glazer, who was Mo Molam's oncologist.
Yes.
And he spoke out against that particular pathway, because I think that there was the sense that it was pushing doctors, sometimes with pressure, to put people out of their misery when they weren't quite in it yet.
Yes, exactly, and that is the worrying part of this assisted dying bill. Jonathan Sacerdoti is with me in the studio. Very good morning. This is your early breakfast. I'm Jonny Gould. I am your administrator of common sense this morning. Stay tuned. The more news to come in a moment. Plenty more to talk about. Is Starmer doing the right thing, meeting Biden and talking down or up war with Putin? A warm welcome. It is your early breakfast show. My name is Jonny Gould, and I'm here till 7 o'clock. And then Christo Fufus, who's been hosting early breakfast all week, moves on to breakfast, standing in for David. So we're all having a jolly good time right here. Reviewing the papers with me, going through all the stories, is Jonathan Sacerdoti. And we've been talking just before we went back on air about all the different stories that may not appear on the front of your papers, but if we turn inside, everyone is predisposed with the story involving Israel and Gaza and the faux humanitarian issues that are going on there, which is an attempt to create a ceasefire rather than anything else. But actually the war is raging to Israel's north, with Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, telling the IDF that there may be a boots-on-the-ground offensive in Lebanon to push back Hezbollah north of the Litani River, which is supposed to be the UN edict. But of course they've completely ignored that. And of course what Israel has been doing for years is going into Syria and dealing with the Iranian land bridge, the threat from Iran as invaders of Syria. Jonathan, that story has come out this week.
Yeah, there's been, actually the New York Times covered it, and the UK media is being a bit slow to catch up. But earlier in the week, there were some reports of Israeli strikes in Syria. Now, Israel has been striking in Syria for some time, even since before October the 7th.
For years.
Part of the strategy of trying to contain the threat of Iran, which has been gradually over many years recruiting Shia militias in the whole of the Middle East and surrounding Israel with what it calls this ring of fire, this belt of fire surrounding the whole nation. And that way they can take the war to Israel with their stated intention of eliminating the entire state by 2040. They even have a countdown clock in Tehran. And they can do that without bringing the war onto their own territory in Iran, because they use these proxies, such as the Houthis in Yemen, who we've heard a lot about in the last year, and also in the north, as you say, in Lebanon, we've had Hezbollah, and of course in Gaza, though they're not Shia militias, Hamas, who are fighting Israel. The aim is to have this sort of ongoing, long drawn-out war of attrition, where Israel is worn down militarily and in other ways in order to try to facilitate its downfall. But Israel has been really carrying out these strikes in the north, whether it's in Lebanon or in Syria, for some time. And now they struck in Syria, somewhat unexpectedly. First, there were the reports that they had bombed some roads, but the part that's come out now is that they carried out this extremely daring and rather heroic-sounding mission, where they actually repelled special forces from helicopters into Syria. So they actually had boots on the ground there. Of course, they haven't admitted that, because that is their method of trying not to escalate. Where those troops went is into this deep underground facility that the Iranians have built in Syria, which is there to make weaponry, which could then be taken, because it's in a location that's close to the border with Lebanon, straight across the border to rearm Hezbollah in its ongoing attacks on Israel. And those troops apparently entered the facility. It's so deep underground that Israel was believed not to be able to deal with it in the traditional way they have of bombings. That's why it was built underground. So those troops went in. They have actually apparently taken away information and machinery, and also then blown up what was left using explosives that they brought with them. Apparently no Israeli injuries or casualties. I think the number I saw of deaths on the other side was 14. And this is actually quite extraordinary. There is also some reporting that they did notify the Americans, and the Americans did not object to this happening before the activity took place. So again, this is Israel showing that even the most untouchable of Iranian assets, even deep in Syria, on the border with Lebanon, are within its reach if they need to act in order to try to stop the threat that Iran is placing around the whole of the state of Israel with facilities like these. And this was called a special scientific research centre. Yeah. But in actual fact, it's part of a wider network that's dotted around Syria in order to develop these weapons, so that it's easier for Iran to rearm Hezbollah in Lebanon without the weaponry actually having to come directly from Iran.
Right. Do you think they also informed Russia about this?
I understand that there were some. I think there were, in fact, if I'm not getting this wrong, I'd need to double check it. I think there were some Russian casualties.
Really?
So again, this is part of what I think maybe some viewers and listeners don't realise, who don't follow this part of the world closely, is that this isn't really some localised skirmish between Israel and Palestinians or Israel and Hamas in Gaza. What's going on is a much broader war, which we're already involved in, whether we like it or not, because we've been, as the West and as Britain, defending Israel against, for example, that massive barrage of incoming from Iran back in April, but also all of the attacks that Iran and others place on Western forces dotted around the world, never mind just the Middle East, through terror proxies and other kinds of attacks, mean that we are involved in that fight. And as you say, Russia is involved, Iran is involved, we have China involved. It's a realignment of the world powers in order to try to rebalance the planet. And I think that's why, despite his personality, many people see Donald Trump as a positive prospect on the world stage as a potential next president, because Joe Biden has shown himself to be weak and inconsistent in foreign policy, whether it's his attitude towards Saudi Arabia, which is a US and Israeli ally, broadly speaking, in this ongoing fight in the Middle East to rebalance power.
This idea that there has been a Russian casualty as well as Iranian and Syrian casualties is significant to my understanding, because of course there are two imperial invaders in Syria keeping Bashar al-Assad in power, and they are Russia and Iran. From what I understand, Israel's traditional modus operandi in going into Syria in an aerial assault to attack Iranian positions is that they contact Russia and tell them to get their soldiers out the way. So this was presumably so top secret that they had to do this and not tell the Russians.
I think that for the sake of Israel's ability to defend itself and create a deterrence, it's had to make certain decisions since October the 7th.
Yes.
At first, it was fighting...
hardening their position.
Exactly. And I think that the strike in Yemen that took out the port and those oil facilities, the strike deep in Iran that took out the Hamas leader when he was there for the late president's funeral, this sort of strike in Syria demonstrates once again the traditional abilities of Israel to fight off its territory, further afield, in order to show a strong deterrence to its enemies. And that really is the only way that Israel has been successful militarily over the years and throughout its history in war. It's by showing that it can fight quickly, far away, deep into other countries when needed in order to protect itself and effectively show a deterrence, because it's a tiny country, people don't necessarily realise that, surrounded by masses of enemies who want to literally wipe it out. When that is the case, the only way that it can effectively defend itself, and this has been Israeli doctrine really since the birth of the nation almost, is to show strength against those kinds of threats, but also the ability to make peace with any neighbours who wish seriously to do so. And it's done that, whether it's been giving back the Sinai after its defensive war against Egypt, when it did eventually make peace with Egypt, albeit a cold peace, but it's shown its ability to make peace, but also, most importantly, that ability to make peace is only really there because of its ability to make war quite decisively when it needs to.
Indeed. 03444991000. Should we talk about Ukraine? And we talk about Iran selling Russia 200 long-range missiles this week, at the same time as Zelensky pleading with NATO to be able to use British and other missiles deep into Russian territory, to which Putin has said, quotes, "At war we will be with NATO if that's done." Is Starmer doing the right thing by saying, well, Russia started this war and they could finish it? I mean, those words are hollow. There's no way Russia would finish a war in this position of impasse. They've lost 500,000 soldiers. He doesn't care about his soldiers, does he? And he doesn't really care that this war of attrition, going into its third winter now, will continue. It's an open-ended war. They're trying to exhaust Ukraine, the smaller nation, because NATO aren't quite on the side of Ukraine in a decisive way.
We've actually got that piece in the Mail from Andrew Neil, who's done a big essay on Ukraine, and that's definitely worth a read, because I think this is one of those situations where it's almost like brinkmanship, whether or not one needs to take seriously the Russian threat, or whether or not one needs to just stand up to it and face it down. And I think that's the dilemma that's facing the world at the moment, the West. And the problem is that Vladimir Putin means business. I think that Joe Biden knows that. I think Keir Starmer certainly knows that. Keir Starmer isn't somebody, I think, who has the strongest, let's say, record. Well, he doesn't have any record in foreign policy because he's only just become the Prime Minister. Well,
he has appointed David Lammy.
Right.
That's his first.
It's a bad first move.
Yes, not great, is it?
The man who didn't know what order the kings and queens of Britain came in, counting them backwards. But so we've got this Andrew Neil essay. It's time to ignore Putin's blood-curdling threats, make clear we will not be cowed or intimidated, and give Ukraine what it needs. So fighting talk from him. And I think that's the sort of talk that we had under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. This question of whether or not we should embolden Ukraine to use those weapons, it's a difficult and sensitive one. I think that's what this meeting between Starmer and Biden was obviously predominantly about, though Starmer refused to say very much about it. He said it was more strategic or broad than it was about individual decisions. there is also the problem that we're left effectively with a lame duck in Washington.
Yes. Yeah, I have to invent a new term for lame duck.
Yes, exactly.
Well, he's been even thrown out by his own party.
Well, there was a sort of senile duck. Now it's a senile lame duck.
Yes.
Maybe it's time for Esther Rantzen to be... no, that's a bad thing to say. I apologise for that. But I meant metaphorically and politically, it could have been time to take him out of his misery. I think it's important, though, that Biden is really basically completely useless at the moment as a president. Kamala Harris wasn't meeting Keir Starmer. She's out campaigning. She is still the vice president, and there might have been some involvement in these sorts of foreign policy decisions before she usurped Biden as the candidate. And I think that...
But isn't Blinken more senior than Kamala in the Biden administration when it comes to foreign policy?
You would hope so. I think that they can't really make big decisions at the moment in the US because of that tradition that, as you know, you're the outgoing and there is going to be an incoming president, you shouldn't commit to anything too massive. And yet there are these wars going on around the world where decisions have to be made, and he is still apparently the president, or at least in name. Whoever was pulling the strings and what have you before is presumably still doing so now. So we'll need to see how this one plays out, but certainly Trump has been saying throughout he will sort this out, he will have the war ended within 24 hours and wild claims like that. I think he even said he'd probably get it sorted out if he wins before he takes office. Of course, the fear is that he might do that by conceding far too much to Putin.
He would concede land, wouldn't he? The wheat fields of Ukraine, the wheat basket of Europe, to the world's biggest nation, making it even bigger. In the Russian psyche, there is this idea that Russia is always invadable from France through Poland, through the flat of the Urals. And if you've ever taken a train in eastern France, you'll know exactly what I mean. It is flat. And Russia has this centuries-old psyche that it is invadable. And indeed, Kursk showed, once again, for the first time since the Second World War, that it is invadable. And there are thousands of miles of Chinese border that make Russia invadable. And that's what we have to understand about our enemy. I think whatever we think about Russia and NATO, we have to acknowledge, I think, in the West, that he is an enemy. He's an enemy, isn't he?
It's
He's
true.
He's not an ally.
But it's also worth putting, even if you don't agree with it in any way, and you certainly don't agree with the actions of Russia in response to that kind of paranoia, if we want to call it that.
It is a paranoia, though,
It is worth still putting your mind in their position and trying to understand why they act how they do. Of course, like all these things, especially with bad actors in the world, the secret is in striking a balance which avoids war, avoids invasions, but also stands up to them when they happen. But often the secret is in not provoking things in the first place or allowing them to be painted as provocations. It's too late now to look back and undo anything. And that's why I think now that we're in this situation, Ukraine deserves, of course, our support and defence against the invasion from Russia, not just for its own sake, but, as you say, because Russia has this kind of attitude towards all its neighbours, towards the West, towards the rest of the world. And Britain is under direct threat from Russia, as we've seen now, and therefore has to take it seriously. Because if you show weakness in one place, it has a knock-on effect in showing weakness not even just to that enemy, but to others. And that's taking it back to the Middle East. One of the problems as well with all of the pressure being put on Israel, which is if effectively the West says, Israel, you have to surrender now, and just calls it a ceasefire, it sends more than just the signal that you want that war ended. It sends the signal that massive invasions like that carried out by Hamas on the 7th of October will be effective at pursuing certain aims in the broader picture, and they won't be fought in a sustained and decisive way through to victory, because the West will tire after a few months and say, no, you have to surrender, it's time to surrender.
Absolutely. And Hamas, of course, would regroup and start again. And there have been 5 other confrontations between Hamas and Israel since Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza 19 years ago. So there's the answer to those who are calling for a ceasefire under any terms. 03444991000. What were the other stories we were talking about? Let's go for something exciting.
There's that one of the teacher who's been cleared for having a banner at a protest that showed Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak as coconuts.
Yes.
It had their heads on coconuts under the tree. And it was, in court, they said that this was a racist action on her part, that she had shown these two non-white government figures, ministers, the Prime Minister, and she was, at the time, a minister, as racist. This was the old coconut slur, is that you are brown on the outside, white on the inside.
Yes.
And so what the allegation against her is that she was saying that Sunak and Braverman were pursuing racist policies, even though on the outside they looked non-white. Now, she has won and said that this was not racist and that it has been found by the judge to be legitimate political satire. Now, this is a difficult one for me because I'm not really in favour of censorship of people's free speech. I am in favour of political satire. We just need to think back to the far more important and dangerous stories of the Muhammad cartoons, for example, and the Charlie Hebdo incident, where people who did express through cartoons and drawings, just like this woman, views which were offensive to some, in that case to extremist Islam, those people got killed or threatened with death for doing so. So in one respect, I do defend this woman's right to show a cartoon image to express her political views, even if I disagree with them, and maybe even if I find her political views racist. And I do think that personally, in my opinion, it is racist to use this coconut term.
It's a horrible slur. And also, if you add texture to the coconutness of it, is that Braverman and Sunak are Hindus and she's a Muslim. So the idea of them both being brown-skinned on either side of the debate is actually irrelevant. These are ideological differences.
I think the idea also that people with darker skin colour need to think and behave in a certain way politically is itself
a racist
idea, because being black, being a person of colour, being any kind of non-white skinned person doesn't oblige you to behave in a certain way politically or to think in a certain way, and I think that's also very dangerous. But I think on the balance of things, I would rather live in a world where you can make a badly thought out, even racist, in my opinion, satirical joke about politicians, people in power. But again, we're back to this idea of double standards. People in the last few weeks have been put in jail for expressing, in some cases, views which were deemed to be racist or problematic and were not attractive. And in this case, this woman is being let off for that problematic or controversial, let's say, placard showing that cartoon. I don't know exactly where the lines should be drawn, but I must say that even in this case, while I find it ridiculous that we would say it wasn't racist, what she did, I think, in my opinion, the coconut slur is racist. I would still always tend to err on that side for everyone.
Indeed. The line drawn at the moment looks like a zigzag, because it depends on what side of the debate you feel we should be on as a country. 0344 499 1000. Talk to me, Jonny Gould, and to Jonathan Sacerdoti, who's reviewing the papers with me right here on Early Breakfast. And we are going to get plain speaking now, because we're going to try and unpack this coconut slur. Good morning to Sharon Miller. Sharon is a regular tweeter. Good morning, Sharon. Sharon says, they call me coconut all the time and I don't give a damn. In actual fact, I love it. Sharon, maybe this means that you're black, or you're just hairy on the outside and a bit white on the inside. I don't know which one, Sharon. But anyway, that's that's that. Samantha says, if a white person had been holding a placard with Suella and Rishi as a coconut, it would have been racist. If a white person had put a picture of a woman carrying the placard, she would have said it was racist. This is just two-tier justice. as Jonathan hinted at, where is the line to be drawn? Tommy Robinson, there's the word. He's going to have a field day, coconut placards everywhere because the law says it's not racist, but it is satirical. I think it is racist. Whoever does it? 0344 499 1000. It's not often that coconuts become the top story here on Early Breakfast, but they're right here. I mean, I remember years ago, Mark Walters, who was a West Indian player, played for Villa, fantastic player. We rued the day that he joined Rangers in Scotland to advance his career, but up there they called him the Jaffa Cake because he was black on the outside and orange in the middle.
Oh dear.
I know. So, and for that, I'm very grateful that we don't have sectarianism in the English game, because it always belongs in Glasgow. And I've always been proud that the English game, with its similar demographics in its cities like Birmingham and Liverpool to Glasgow, has never said, right, Liverpool is Protestant and Catholic, is Everton and all that kind of nonsense. We never had that. Because we have a completely different social history, and thank the Lord for that. And that's why I think the English game was syndicated around the world so much, because it was a clean skin meritocracy. And I use the word clean skin, unintended pun there, I assure you, because it was a game of purity, it was a game of competition and sportsmanship, and didn't have layers of sectarianism and politics all over it. 0344 499 1000. And there's been a major development, Jonathan, in the Rotherham rape story as well.
Yes, 7 men who were convicted of a string of child sexual abuse offences actually were faced down by one of the victims in court, reading a victim statement at the end. And it's been reported on very powerfully, actually, by Charlie Peters. The speech was particularly notable because I think it draws a lot of attention to this issue, which has been, again, avoided historically for sensitivities around being racist. The idea that it would be racist to focus on it because these men all came from similar ethnic background and similar cultural background. And what was so startling about hearing this victim statement in court was that she spoke out very bravely about the effect it had had on her. Of course, that sort of abuse, we're talking about rape and abuse which went on for a number of years, involved also getting children addicted to drugs.
Young white girls.
Yeah.
Let's say it for what it is.
Very much.
Because it's racial on both sides.
Yes.
Isn't it?
And I mean, these girls were 11, 12, 13. One of them was said to have been forced to have sexual relations, sexual rapes with 150 men by her 16th birthday. They were trafficked around the country by these men, shared around, abused in a variety of locations, at times imprisoned, and they weren't taken seriously for a very long time. People who did focus on this case historically were often slurred as being racist, and often it was said that they were doing so because of their racism. I don't think that's fair, and I think that people who said that about them owe those champions of this story, of trying to get this story out, a massive apology, but also a massive vote of thanks for pursuing it despite those horrible allegations of racism, because I can't think of many things that could be more important than stopping this sort of abuse in our country. And yet this one journalist who was in the court claims he was the only journalist there at the time that she read out this statement. Now, if that's true, or if it's even nearly true, it shows you that we haven't really learnt anything.
No.
Because this should be on the front pages of every newspaper. This should be a massive story. It was on the BBC's 10 o'clock news, but it's not been totally ignored. But it certainly hasn't been given the level of attention that it deserves. And I think the fear is that it could be still going on.
It's still going on?
Yeah.
And Andrew Norfolk brought the story to the attention of the world about 10 years ago or more. I don't think we live in a climate where Tommy Robinson will ever get an apology for this, but he has been one of the champions I think, of this story as well.
I think also Tommy Robinson's a really interesting case because he has a very different background to most people who are campaigners or journalists. And he's a working class guy who became interested in these topics that he's interested in because of where he grew up in Luton. And he's spoken about this actually, he's actually quite an eloquent speaker about his experience and his issues. He's done these long interviews recently with Jordan Peterson, which you can find on YouTube, though there's been problems with the suppression even of those.
Yes, they've demonetised them.
Right, and hidden them effectively from being found easily. The point is that whatever one likes or dislikes about Tommy Robinson and his past, and there is stuff to dislike, I think he'd probably be willing to accept that himself. His allegation is that he's been persecuted by the establishment. He alleges that the police and the establishment have continually come up with trumped up charges and arrests in order to try to silence him on these topics that he talks about, like the child abuse gangs, the Rotherham child abuse gangs. He, to his credit, is one of those personalities who, the more he's attacked and the more he sees the establishment attacking him, actually it just emboldens him.
Fights back,
And he says it won't silence him, he won't allow them to do that. My problem is this, that if you are somebody that cares about these topics, but you're also somebody that's very concerned about showing support for someone like Tommy Robinson, that's your own choice, and I do understand it. The problem is when there aren't enough mainstream people who aren't Tommy Robinson for you to attach yourself to. I think that these are very real concerns that many people in this country have, and yet they don't feel there's anywhere they can go with them. There are no mainstream or serious politicians who they can take those concerns to. And when some do arise, even, let's say, Nigel Farage has touched on some similar topics, there is a massive pile-on to try to trash those people and to paint them as racist and problematic and violent or whatever it might be. So I think it's time that we should be able to have very difficult conversations, even at the risk of sometimes saying the wrong thing, and learning from one another, but taking them seriously, most of all for the victims. These poor young women now who were
not even teenagers, some of them.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it is unthinkable. And when it comes to things like the Jimmy Savile controversy, or even more recently, Hugh Edwards, we're perfectly willing to talk about child sexual abuse or child pornography. But when it comes to these horrific cases, which are ongoing and much more recent, there is this sort of blanket silence among some parts of the media and society and politicians and the commentariat and the chattering classes because they're scared it's racist. It's a bit like when the Manchester Arena bomber was spotted.
I was about to raise that.
And the security guard in I think the inquest said that he didn't want to flag this dodgy guy carrying a rucksack which turned out to be a bomb because he was scared it would be racist of him to do so. This is a massive problem that we have. We need to be more
huge problem.
More scared of terrorism and child abuse than we are of potentially being seen as racist for flagging it in certain circumstances.
We have to see what that Ariana Grande attack was, and the one which was foiled because Taylor Swift in Vienna decided that the risk was too big, and so she cancelled the concert. And that is that Islamists don't like girls dancing. It was an attack on female freedom of singing and expression.
And to broaden
we have to understand that.
To broaden it out to this story, there is also a problem among certain cultures and certain beliefs where people have demonstrably been shown to believe that these white teenage or younger girls were somehow acceptable targets for this kind of horrific sexual abuse and torture. It's not acceptable, and I think calling it out and noticing when there is a cultural or ethnic element to it must be allowed as part of the conversation. In fact, more than must be allowed. That's a massive understatement. It's a crucial, pressing, vital, urgent conversation that we need to have, because if we can't say that our values are better than that, if we can't say that Western or British values are better than that, and if in certain circumstances issues of nationality or race come into it as well when we're discussing those issues of culture, we have a problem. The reason we are better is not because of our colour or where we come from, but it might be attached to the culture of where we grew up or the people with whom we mix, and I think we have to have those conversations.
Yes, it is true truly progressive to have an unbridled conversation. And I think I'm very grateful to be working on a station like Talk, which I think is becoming more and more important. This is where the nation comes to talk, and I appreciate the openness here. 0344 499 1000, and talk to myself and Jonathan Sacerdoti here for the next 25 minutes or so. I just want to try and broaden the conversation now, because apparently in The Sun this morning, the fuel aid tax, the fuel aid axe is not cruel, according to Keir Starmer. The PM yesterday denied his move to make winter fuel payments means-tested was a punishment for pensioners. He did this from the White House or on the plane home from Washington, D.C. He refused to reveal if there will be more pain for OAPs in the budget. Ministers have ruled out stripping pensioners of free bus passes. Oh, thank goodness for that. But fears are mounting. The single-person council tax discount could be axed by Chancellor Rachel Reeves in October. I heard a tax expert say that inheritance tax, if you closed loopholes, like apparently if you invest in AIM shares, they are completely free of inheritance tax. So these accountants bundle up a bunch of AIM shares, get you to invest in those, and then you can pass it on to your kids without any problem at all. And that, apparently, if they close that loophole, could be £2 million or so.
Well, I think inheritance tax is inherently immoral. It's money that's already been taxed.
Tax upon tax.
Exactly. I think it is another example of a problem that the left often has, broadly speaking, which is that taxation should not be done out of jealousy. And I think that what's unfortunate, whether it is the motivation behind this new Labour government or not, a lot of their early actions and statements seem to indicate an element of that rule by jealousy. And what I mean by that is, the fuel aid act is not necessarily in line with that, but it is a very punitive thing to do to what is seen as a vulnerable part of society, the elderly.
Yeah.
Admittedly, there is some discussion to be had about wealthy older people getting fuel aid, but regardless of that, this will almost certainly have a negative effect on some older people who can't afford it, who fall on the lines. But for example, the VAT on schooling, I do understand the ideological idea that Labour and the left are against private schooling, but this is a Prime Minister who, on the way into 10 Downing Street, told us he wouldn't be making decisions and governing by ideology and dogma, but one of his flagship policies, albeit before the election, he made it clear he wanted to do this, to put an extra 20% on private school fees to tax education is an extraordinary move, especially when it is most likely to have a net negative effect on the nation, because it will mean that some people literally have to leave a school in the middle of a school year. If you're a parent or a middle-class person, or even whoever you are in society, private schooling is not cheap. In choosing it for your children, there is an inequality for sure that you're able to, but some of those people work very hard, forego all sorts of things in their lives in order to be able to afford it, and are on the very borderline of being able to afford it. Put an extra 20% on that, they won't be able to. All of those people, these are well-rehearsed arguments, so I won't go through them in detail, but will be pushed back into the state education system, which will be further burdened. I think that it's a very foolish move, not just because of the fact that it's likely to be ineffective, but because of the fact that it looks like a move of jealousy.
I've said it before that I think there's something inherently immoral about taxing youthful invention, youthful initiative. The idea that your educational progress should be taxed. The idea of initiative, the idea of invention, the idea of youthful eyes looking at new problems in a new light. You tax it, as you say, out of jealousy is completely immoral. 0344 499 1000. This is where the nation comes to talk. One of my questions this morning at the start of the show is, when will Starmer cut out the miserable talk? And the reason I say that, Jonathan Sacerdoti, is because the Times came up with a brand new word this morning, a word that I've never heard before, but a word that is instantly understandable. It's miserableism. He's miserable, isn't he?
It's going to get worse before it gets better.
I don't want to hear that. We live in a great country. It's been great for 300 years, and maybe even longer, God bless it. And there's a lot that's right about this country. It's not perfect, but why don't we concentrate and accentuate the positive? We don't need leadership to tell us, oh, it's all the Tories' fault, but look, we're going to repair the country. Actually, the old fellas, Hunt and Sunak, did rather stabilise the economy before they were kicked out. Did they not?
New Labour swept in with that slogan, things can only get better.
And they left a skint.
Well, they did, according to that note left in the Treasury.
Yeah.
But then, if New Labour swept in with things can only get better, it seems like New Labour is coming in with things can only get quite a bit worse before we can think about maybe making them better in a second term. Please give us another one. And I think that is a much harder sell to the nation. Now, it might be true, I don't know, but I suspect that part of the art of politics is knowing how to pitch good and bad to the nation. And I think there's this sense from some of the Labour MPs that Keir Starmer is overdoing it with the trash talking of our current situation. And that's important not just because of people's mood, because there's some argument to be made that putting people in a serious frame of mind and a bad mood is valid if there are quite some challenges ahead. But I think because of what it does more broadly to the economy potentially and to business, if the Chancellor and the Prime Minister keep speaking this way, keep talking about these massive black holes, keep talking about the need to take away fuel aid allowances from the elderly, that's how bad things are, it's going to scare business and it's not going to encourage growth, which is their other stated aim. And of course, growth is the only way that we can try to fix many of these problems. But so what have we heard from Labour since they took over government after winning the last election? We've heard that the NHS needs to reform or die. These are the words.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a terrifying slogan. I must say...
Of course, it would never die under a left-wing government.
We're all familiar with the idea that the NHS is dreadful, and I don't say that...
It's not dreadful in every way.
No, it's not, but it is dreadful, I think, in many ways, and I think
it's quite good in other ways too.
I would say that we've been worn down. We have now very low expectations when it comes to... We say things like, oh, well, when you have an emergency, or if you're suddenly struck down with, God forbid, cancer or something like that, it looks after you. Of course it does, and we mustn't be ungrateful for the things that our healthcare system provides us, or for the many good people working within it.
Absolutely.
Who are looking after us.
Who need motivating.
However, it can't be this holy cow, this sort of religion that this state has developed.
It can't be.
We need to be able to look at other states, and again, I talk about Israel a lot when I'm on the show with you, because it's one of my areas of expertise. But I know, for example, the Israeli healthcare system is a good balance between private and national. So there, for example, as in other countries, some European countries as well, the government pays for your insurance, but there are 3 parallel insurance companies. And
they all compete with each other. They
compete with each other, and this private element within the National Health Service there means that there is some competition which benefits both the state because of the value for money and also the patients because they have some level of choice. They are also able, as far as I understand it, to supplement their own insurance. So the state pays a certain amount for everybody, and then those who wish to can put more money in and alter their level of coverage. Now, that might seem unfair to an ideological left-wing government. On the other hand, what it does is, in my opinion, infinitely better than what we have here. Those of us who are able to afford private healthcare here, who are able to afford private health insurance here, are completely separate. So we enjoy a system of healthcare which exists in a vacuum from the national one. The only benefit it has to the national one is that it takes us out of that system and therefore removes some of the burden. But it doesn't really inject into that system the benefits that it could do if the two were combined. So I think that Starmer is right, it needs reforming, but I think he's very wrong in how he is talking about things being so miserable, and I think that it is all aimed towards trying to get a second term already.
That is Jonathan Sacerdoti. Another term. There's another 4.5 years of this to go, and another 11 minutes as well of early breakfast with me, Jonny Gould. Jonathan with me as well. Stay tuned. You've had more plaudits. Last week you made Jane cry in Marbella. She hasn't phoned again today, but I'm sure she'll be watching again later. Great guest, Jonathan, says Tony. Will he be at Downing Street for the peaceful protest on the 26th of October? It's aimed to stand up for a lot of things discussed today. I think that is the Tommy Robinson protest, which is organised for next month. But actually, you were outside the Foreign Office on an egg crate making a speech yourself this week.
I was. There was a protest outside the Foreign Office because of this Labour government's recent actions, which have been seen as weakening Israel in this time of need when it's standing up against these 7 fronts of war, all of them coordinated and led by Iran. Specifically, David Lammy announcing that partial arms embargo, which has been seen as quite performative. He said it was a legal thing made reluctantly against their will, but in reality, many international law experts have said there was no need for it to happen. Indeed, the US said that they monitor Israel's actions very closely and don't believe that there is grounds for cancelling any arms sales at this stage because of international law being breached. But the UK, obviously, under David Lammy and Keir Starmer, feels differently. And other moves as well. For example, as soon as they came back into power, Labour decided that Britain would start refunding UNRWA, the UN agency that looks after Palestinians, despite the fact that since October the 7th, Israel has demonstrated many, many compromising links between UNRWA and the terrorist organisation Hamas. And those links have been known actually for much longer. People like Hillel Neuer of UN Watch have been documenting the rot at the heart of UNRWA for so long that it was really refreshing that it actually came out so publicly after October the 7th. It's absolutely undeniable that there are these strong links, and refunding UNRWA is not necessarily the right way to help Palestinian people, but this government decided almost instantly upon coming into power that that's something they do. And I think there's the fear, finally, just quickly, that they may try to use the October the 7th horrific terror attacks as the starting point for them to maybe recognise Palestinian statehood, effectively rewarding terrorism.
Rewarding terrorism, which we must avoid. And by the way, mobile phones in schools are being banned by a major schools trust which runs 44 around the country. And I think this is a prescient issue. I think not just affecting mental health, which is one thing, but it distracts children. It makes communication a very, very difficult thing and less aware of their surroundings, etc. What a waste of life looking at your phone like this. And it starts at 8 years old.
Well, it's hard for me to say that because I am often looking at my phone.
I know.
However, and I don't have children, so it's very easy for me to make this next statement, but I want to be one of those parents who doesn't have phones for their kids till a fairly good age, who has even maybe no television in the house. I'm not sure my other half would agree with that, but for years I didn't have a television, even when I worked in TV. I think that it's difficult to bring up children without that, but it's probably quite good not to have those influences because they're hard to moderate. So some of it is good. And I will stand up for the internet and social media and all of these things. They're immensely powerful tools that help all of us be smarter, better informed and what have you. But they're also
better manipulated
hijacked, exactly, by manipulators, big tech censoring what we can see. For example, in the run-up to elections, these unelected shady figures who decide what stories we're allowed to see and not see on social media influences elections. I think that all of these things are of massive concern for adults, but especially for children. And in schools, some of the rot that sets in, whether it's from networks like TikTok, which is of course potentially manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party to make our children dumber, while they use their version to make their children smarter.
Yes.
These are all important things, and if we can't control them, then maybe we should limit the amount of time that our kids have accessing them. But perhaps that's the job of parents and not necessarily the government.
It is ultimately how you're brung up, isn't it? Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you very much indeed for being my paper pal this morning.